This is a presentation of National Streaming Sports. Over 20 podcasters, 70 weekly shows, and a 3.4-star rating on Roku TV.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
That song is too good for me to interrupt, Mac. That's the Stones' first hit in 1965, and I think it's actually their best song of all time. And I'm a pretty big Stones fan. Hi, my name is Frank Latirzo. Welcome to Gloved Fist. Joined by co-host Jack Hirsch, former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America. Jack, how are you tonight? We don't have much of a schedule. We're going to pretty much go potpourri, but let me start off by asking, how are you? You got your typical smile on your face, or grin, I should say. What's on your mind?
Well, you know, like you said, Frank, some weeks are a lot more busy than others. Some weeks have a big buzz. There was a big fight on the weekend, or there's a big fight, you know, coming up. But this week, it's kind of falling in between the cracks. Next week, we're going to talk about the Terence Crawford fight, where his career is going, because that fight's going to be the following weekend. But when it's 2 weeks away, there's such
actually it's a good card too.
Early. Yeah, it's a good card, but it's good. We'll put a little more emphasis, I'm sure, on it next week. Not that we won't talk about it at all tonight. We'll see how things go. And there was the Jake Paul fight, which didn't create much of a buzz in Tampa over the weekend. But listen, it's worth mentioning. Listen, Paul's a personality. I don't have much apprehension talking about him because he's a real fighter. He just happens to be fighting martial arts guys, and I'll give him credit. He's representing the sport of boxing against martial artists, and he's upholding the honor of the sport of boxing, unlike Tyson Fury, who could barely get by a mixed martial artist guy, Francis Ngannou, and only win a split decision. Paul is withholding the honor of boxing. The one fight he lost was against the boxer, Tommy Fury, but he's doing well against good martial arts guys. And, you know, he beat this bare knuckle guy, Mike Perry. I'm not going to lie. I don't know anything about Mike Perry, but what I saw in the clips, I didn't watch the whole fight. I wasn't going to get it on pay-per-view. He was a little lacking in technique, Mike Perry, but he was a very tough guy. Jake Paul kind of looked a little stale. For the first time I ever saw him, he kind of looked bored a little bit. Like he wasn't really.
He probably was.
Fight. Yeah, and fighters have fights like that. Even the great ones, they have a fight where they're bored and they don't perform really quite up to standards, even though they're going to win that fight decisively. And it was in Tampa, and he was supposed to be fighting Mike Tyson. So it has to be a letdown from Mike Tyson to Mike Perry.
I will give Jake Paul this, Jack. He has improved. He has legitimate power. I mean, you can't deny that. The guy can hit. His technique is getting a little bit better. But as you said, he's fought one pro boxer who was a genuine pro boxer, a legit fighter.
Not that
and he lost a close decision.
Yeah, but Jake Paul is padding his record. And it's only a matter of time, if he keeps winning, that he's going to get a title match. And I'm going to tell you something. If he beats Mike Tyson, stops him, let's say hypothetically, your favorite fighter, Canelo, is probably going to step up. And I could see him fighting Jake Paul because he's going to think, oh, I could make 150 fighting Jake Paul. I could make 150 million fighting David Benavidez, or whatever amount they're going to give him, whatever massive amount. He's going to go with the safe fight with Jake Paul, and we're going to hear Canelo say, oh, I would beat Benavidez easy. It wouldn't be any problem. I mean, every time Canelo talks, and I wasn't intending to go off on Canelo, he makes himself sound like a darn fool from saying he thought he beat Bivol Now he's kind of finally getting off that to now saying, oh, he beat Benavidez easy, no problem at all, but I'll fight who I want. Everyone's demanding that fight. If you really think you're going to beat him easy, then take the darn fight. You're going to get massive money. Or say this, I think I would beat Benavidez, but he's a serious threat, and he weighs so much after the fight. This is a guy who's on a different weight class, but if he makes the weight, it's a fight that interests me, that it might be made. I think I would beat him. But once you say you're going to beat a guy easy, you open yourself up to all type of ridicule if you don't take the fight.
Jack, after that soliloquy, let me ask you this. Why do you take what these guys say serious? To me, when fighters talk, it's like a politician talking, okay? I don't take anything they say seriously at all. Jake Paul, Canelo, any of them, they just say words. They don't say that much. So I don't care what Canelo says. The bottom line is everyone who follows this sport, including you and myself, we both know that for some reason, I don't know the reason, you don't know the reason, only Canelo knows the reason, but he is showing absolute trepidation that he does not want to fight David Benavidez. I don't know if he's afraid of him, if he thinks he can't beat him, if he thinks it's too close of a call, but I don't take what they say serious. And the problem with Canelo is, Jack, because he's done so much, he's been around so long, and because he has a pretty good resume, I wouldn't be surprised if they never fight, and I don't even think it's going to hurt him.
But he's not only ducking Benavidez, His Excellency it's ready to offer massive money to fight Terence Crawford. He doesn't want to fight Crawford either. So he doesn't want to fight the guy who's too big. He doesn't want to fight the guy who's too small. The guy too big is tremendously risky. The guy who's too small, it would be humiliating to lose to. So he's caught in between in the middle. So instead, he wants
so that's what he's doing, Jack.
With Chris Eubank, Edgar Berlanga. The fight with Berlanga is a massive joke. I've said it over and over on this show. Let me go a step further, okay? And I honestly mean this. I give Jake Paul as good or better chance of upsetting Canelo than I would give Edgar Berlanga. And I've seen Berlanga a lot. I have the book on him. Jake Paul would have a better chance of beating Canelo if he signed to fight him, because Jake Paul is big. He would, as long as Jake Paul didn't have to lose all that weight and weaken himself. I mean, if Jake Paul could fight,
but for the money that fight would draw, he might do that. Although I don't think he could get to 68.
Well, no. Canelo would have to open up the books, maybe let him weigh in at 180 or something like that. And Canelo could come in at 170, 175. Canelo would have to give away a little weight, obviously.
A little bit.
But the point I'm trying to make, Berlanga has virtually no chance in the fight.
No, he doesn't. And guess what, Jack? The fight will still sell. The fight will still sell because it's Canelo.
Well, Canelo, but to a point, I don't think you could sell that fight. A Chris Eubank fight, it's hard to sell. Eubank's got some talent. It's not a joke of a fight, but it's the fights we don't want to see for Canelo. We're tired of it at this point. It's time for a big fight. I'd rather see him force Bivol to go down to 168 and make that match than fight Eubank, Berlanga. Even though Bivol would be at a big disadvantage, it would still be a 50-50.
Jack, you just said what Canelo's doing. So we know what he's doing. There's too much risk in Benavidez, the big guy, too much humiliation with Crawford, the smaller man. So he's just picking his spots and fighting the double-A guys, and that's what he's going to do. And as long as people continue to buy it, that's what we're going to get. And Jack, let me just say one thing off topic a little bit. You know what cracks me up? Joe Bergman and Mac are having like this little love, and thank you, Joe. You did a great job. You know what the funny thing is? Mac hates Joe's team, and Joe hates Mac's team. And I'm talking Giants and Eagles, and how they're acting like they're blood brothers now when Joe can't stand the Giants and Mac can't stand the Eagles. I just think it's funny.
Well, Joe seems to be backing Mac in his argument against you because Mac is bragging Laterza was exposed, making up excuses for Crawford ducking boots. But that's another issue. We don't.
Wait a second, Jack. But you know what? I like your passive aggressive. That I have not been exposed.
My daughter said the other day I was passive aggressive.
So there must be some too. Your daughter's a smart girl.
I think I am. I hate myself for it, Mac. It's gonna help me the term. I'm gonna try to
Jack. If I offered Mac, if I offered Mac 5-1 odds and gave him boots, he wouldn't bet me more than $5 on the fight because he knows that I'm correct. And if Crawford takes the fight, as much as I love Boots, Crawford walks out with the W. Boots gets his first loss.
I want to talk to you about a couple of pictures I saw. Madrimov and Crawford. Did you? I don't know whether you saw the picture. Madrimov, the size
looks like a linebacker.
Exactly, and Crawford, in comparison, is a little guy. So, and I know Madrimov has skills, so I don't see a Crawford blowout. I see Crawford in a tough fight stopping Madrimov. I see him stopping him, but he's going to have to really put it all together.
Did you see the clips of Crawford and Andre Ward?
I saw the still picture. I don't. What?
I saw some of the film. The point is, Jack, Crawford did not look that small next to Andre Ward. I think he's filled out some.
What was Ward doing sparring? Would you tell me?
I don't know how that came to be. And they weren't going all out sparring. They were basically playing tag.
Yeah. And
they were moving around. I mean, it's not an indication of anything other than I realized that Crawford was wasn't that much smaller than Andre Ward. And going back to Madrimov, let me just say this, and I've been pretty consistent with this. When Crawford gets beat, if we see him get beat, if he hangs on long enough, he's going to get beat. And I don't think he's going to retire undefeated. Jack, I don't think it's going to be against a slickster like a Pernell Whitaker or a Mayweather. I think Crawford handles those guys because he has the punch and he's equally as skilled as them. I think when we see Crawford get beat, it's going to be by a guy who has an overload of physicality, who he can't hurt and who can walk him down and bully him. And from what I've seen, I'm not saying this guy's going to be the guy to do it, but I just think the template to give Crawford a hard time, because when you have an overload of physicality, that will nullify Crawford's speed, his skill, and if you're really durable, it can offset some of his power. So even though the guy's only 11-0, he has a good amateur pedigree, and I just think this style, him being a brutal, physical guy who may be able to impose himself on Crawford more than like a Jeff Horn did, I don't think this is a walk in the park.
I think before Crawford eventually gets beat, someone pushes him to the limit. He hasn't really been truly pushed to the limit in his whole career. Against Sean Porter, Porter held him close through 9 rounds. It was kind of nip and tuck. Crawford was slightly ahead 5 rounds to 4. So we started to have some doubts. Wow, maybe, Porter's going to hold him to a draw. Who knows how the judges are going to score.
I never felt that, Jack, to be honest.
Right. But but to us, Crawford, not to you, to some people, Crawford may have been running out of rounds. When you think at the end of 9 rounds, he's only got 3 rounds left. But Crawford,
he was only up by a round.
He's such a cool customer. 3 rounds is a lot for him. It's a lot. It's like a quarterback on his own 10-yard line. He has 2 minutes left. Time's not a factor. He's going to move his team down the field. If he's a truly great quarterback, like a Patrick Mahomes, he'll move his team 90 yards down the field in 2 minutes.
Right. You just know that, like,
he knows, just get him the ball, and he knows he'll get it done. And you get the feeling Crawford is that same type of fighter. It could be a close fight for 8 rounds. Then he's going to up the ante. at that point. But I think you're going to see a situation Crawford wins a close decision over someone before he actually loses a fight, and that's going to take away a little of his invincibility. And then we're not going to be so shocked when he does get beat. I don't think we're going to be flabbergasted. I think we're going to, like Roy Jones with Tarver, the first fight, even though we were shocked he got stopped in the second fight. Larry Holmes with Tim Witherspoon. Witherspoon held him close. Then it's not as shocking when the guy does eventually lose.
I actually felt that Roy pulled out the Tarver fight in the last round, the first fight.
I thought Jones won the fight. Yeah.
I thought he pulled it out in the last round. And Roy showed me a lot in that. And you know what, Jack? Yeah. There's a guy, I saw something today, and it was one of those typical Mayweather or Roy Jones posts. Who was better, not who made more money, who was the better fighter, blah, blah, blah. And I started thinking, we write Roy Jones off a lot because of the second fight with Tarver and then the subsequent bad showings after that. But just think, what if Roy Jones walks away after he beat Ruiz? He never fights again. He has basically 50 fights under his belt. He's never really been close to losing. And the Montel Griffin fight that he lost, we know what happened there. That was a DQ. He was dominating Griffin. He killed him in the rematch.
He was dominating Griffin. Montel Griffin gave him fits in those early
Jack,
rounds.
he gave him stylistically getting low. He was causing Roy problems. But at the end of the fight, Roy had the puzzle solved
he
was taking it to him and taking him apart. When that fight ended, we had no doubt who the better fighter was. But Roy, in a way, Jack, if you think about it, and I know guys that do this, but if you think about this, he retires after Ruiz. He takes one loss, Hopkins, or he gives Hopkins his first loss, and he won the fight 8-4. So he beat a very good Hopkins easily. Tony was undefeated when they fought, and I think Roy won 10 out of the 12 rounds, maybe won 11, I don't know. And then he beats a guy like Ruiz, who's 50 pounds bigger than anybody he ever fought. If he walks away then, I just think we look at him completely different, where now he doesn't do good in these hypothetical matchups. But if that Roy Jones of the 49-0 or 49-0-1 or 49-1, if that Roy Jones retired, we look at him a lot different, and he'd be a lot higher on the Mount Everest. And you could make a case, if he retired after beating John Ruiz, you could make a case. Yeah, he doesn't pass Robinson, but he could. He's in that top 3 or 4 all-time pound for pound.
Robinson was great. Let's not put him in a class by himself. I'm getting tired of this Sugar Ray Robinson, and then there's all the rest. You had a number of guys who are on a level with Robinson. Maybe Robinson was slightly ahead. I have no problem calling Robinson the greatest fighter of all time, pound for pound. I don't have a problem with that. What I have a problem is, don't even compare anyone to Sugar Ray. Well, I'll compare a number of them. I'll compare Willie Pep to him. Willie Pep was 62-0 to start his career, won his first 62 fights. Then he loses a close decision to a Hall of Famer, Sammy Angot. And after losing that close decision, he went 72-0-1 in his next 73 fights. Imagine that. He had a record of 134-1-1. So don't tell me Willie Pep isn't in Robinson's league or close. You gave a hypothetical thing of Roy Jones. Let me throw this at you. If Roberto Duran retired after the first Sugar Ray Robinson fight, his record would have been 72-1. The only loss is Steven DeJesus
with 55 knockouts.
I could have made the argument Roberto Duran pound for pound was the best of all time. You would have disagreed, but it would have been debatable. You'd have to sit down and discuss it and analyze it and respect the opinion, even though you disagree with it. Look, Robinson was super. And let me tell you about Robinson, what impressed me as much as anything. When he was washed up in his 40s, he was fighting top-of-the-line guys, losing, but never getting stopped. He'd always go the distance and be competitive. He would always go the distance against these top guys. And even his last fight, I was watching a tape the other day, believe it or not. I don't know what gave me an urge to turn to it on YouTube. Him in his last fight with Joey Archer. Robinson was getting outpointed by a great fight in Archer. It's a shame he was never world champion, Joey Archer. He's certainly worthy of being one. But Robinson was throwing punches, in a classy type way, but he was old at that point. But he was still looking good in a way, offensively at least.
So, Jack, in a way, you're kind of making my case. I've seen the clips of Willie Pep. I've seen what's out there, and I've seen what's the clips on Robinson. And yes, as great as Pep's record was, Robinson beat better opposition. He beat them more convincingly. And when I watch those two guys as fighters and what they could do in the ring, I don't think Pep is in Robinson's league. Defensively, a little bit better, but overall, Jack, nobody brought to the ring what Robinson did. To me, Robinson is sort of like, and you're going to go crazy with this, but I think Bobby Orr is the best overall player in NHL history from end to end. Gretzky and Lemieux were better scorers, but Lemieux, Orr could do it all. There was nothing that anybody could do better than Robinson, and he did 9 or 10 things better than the rest of the guys. So I do think that he is Mount Olympus, and I think the argument that when we're going to talk about the best fighters, it starts with, okay, who was number 2? And based on the record and what he brought to the ring.
You talk about competition. We always discriminate against heavyweights when we talk pound for pound. We always discriminate against them. I mean, I could say Ali and Joe Louis were pound for pound the greats.
They didn't beat nearly the Hall of Famers that Robinson did, Jack.
Ali beat better competition than Robinson. Ali beat monsters, absolute monsters. I mean, George Foreman and Sonny Liston were considered to be invincible when Ali beat him. Joe Frazier, listen, pound for pound, Joe Frazier, Jake LaMotta.
I would say Frazier for a couple of years at his peak, his apex was a little bit higher than LaMotta's, but it's a good comparison. And Robinson spotted him 15 pounds. Ali was bigger than Frazier.
That's correct.
Yeah, but when I watch,
no argument saying Robinson is number 1 pound for pound. That's not the point I'm trying to make. It's debatable. Don't say stuff like Willie Pep isn't even in his league. Or don't tell me Ali is in his league, or Sugar Ray Leonard isn't in his league. Leonard didn't have nearly the amount of fights. He didn't have the career Robinson had, perhaps. But it's a different era. Guys fight less. I mean, I could say Harry Greb was the greatest if I want to. If you look,
I think I have Harry Greb number 2 all time pound for pound.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Based on his resume, there's no film, there's no real film of him, but he is the one fighter. There's 2 guys that I will give their props to and say, without a doubt, they're all-time greats. And Jack, it's because their resume is so deep. And even though we don't have a lot of films of Greb and Sam Langford, there's a lot of films of the guys they fought and beat. Okay. And when you look at the deepness of their records, I mean, you can't debate it. They're my top 3 pound for pound. And as far as Ali and Robinson, I mean, I still think Robinson probably fought better guys from top to bottom, but Ali had a couple of those big names. But Jack, Robinson was clearly a better fighter than Ali.
Yeah, if you look at Ali's second level of opponents, I mean, not the monsters I mentioned, just the Ernie Terrell, the Ron Lyles, the Jerry Quarries, guys like that, they're awesome fighters.
It's hard to argue against Ali's resume, Jack.
Beat these guys. I mean, stop them, beat them. I mean, it was routine. It was routine for Ali to beat very good fighters.
Okay, but Jack, if we're going to be honest, and I'm the hugest Ali fan in the world, if we look at his first career from 60 to 67. Who did he beat that was so terrific other than an older Sonny Liston?
You don't get the opportunity to fight the top guys sometimes on the way up because they don't want to fight you. Once you have the title, everyone's coming after you. And Ali fought the best available when he had the title. He beat it Henry Cooper, Doug Jones, guys like that. But in the lead up, he didn't have the other opponents who were there for him to beat. He was given an old Archie Moore, not his fault. But it was, he beat everyone that was put in front of him that was viable.
But Jack, if he never comes back, after 67, where they would look at his record and say, he beat Sonny Liston, he beat Ernie Terrell, who lost to Cleveland Williams. We would find the stinkers in Terrell.
No, Terrell was a great fighter when he fought Ali, but in comparison, Ali was a higher level. That was.
You think Ernie Terrell was a great heavyweight?
No, Ernie Terrell, the night he fought Ali, was outstanding, but he was in with arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time that night, and he was beaten lopsidedly, but the fight was competitive. It was a competitive fight. It wasn't like he made Ali work. Ali couldn't stop him.
Jack, Ali won 12 rounds.
Ali won 13 rounds, and they did better than.
So how do you say it was competitive? The only thing he didn't get was the knockout.
I'll give you an example. Go to the 7th round of that fight when you have a chance.
I have it in my head. I know exactly what it looks like.
Ali hurt Terrell badly. He hit him with a left hook. Terrell didn't see it. Terrell was in trouble. Ali went for the knockout. Terrell fought back on 2 different occasions. Once he got Ali in the corner, he hit him with a big overhand right, and Ali was holding on tightly. He jawed Ali. Another time he got him on the ropes, hit him an uppercut under the heart, and Ali was holding on. I mean, Ali had to really work hard in that fight.
I see that differently, Jack.
In comparison, listen, if Floyd Patterson came along during a tougher heavyweight era, didn't come along at the right time, then it would have been, we wouldn't be looking at him the same way. He wouldn't.
Actually, he did, Jack. They just kept him away from the really good guys.
But he wouldn't have won the heavyweight title. He wouldn't have beaten Sonny Liston. Okay? He wouldn't have beaten Ali. Floyd Patterson was capable of maybe beating the Jerry Quarry types, the Jimmy Ellis types, the Ingemar Johansson types. But, he probably wouldn't have beaten Marciano had, Marciano. He wouldn't have beaten Marciano if Rocky was at his absolute peak. Marciano
Jack,
yeah.
Ali has the best resume of any heavyweight ever. I'll give you that. But I just don't think it's better than Robinson's. And there are not many. In fact, maybe only Greb and Langford have an overall better resume than Robinson when Robinson was Robinson. I'm not talking about the Robinson in 1963. But look, it's conjecture, but I don't think there's any doubt that Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest fighter who ever put on boxing gloves. I don't think there's any question that the debate begins with who you think is number 2, who Mac thinks is number 2, who Russell thinks is number 2, who Haskop thinks is number 2. But number 1 is etched in stone, in my opinion.
Let me tell you, Frank, when a guy puts his stake in the ground, what do you call it when you put your stick in the ground?
You're dying on that hill.
No. I mean, once a guy comes up and we consider him when we're young the greatest ever, we don't give anyone a chance to surpass them. Usually. I'll give you an example. Jim Brown is a running back. People are never going to say there's a greater running back than Jim Brown. Pitcher, Sandy Koufax. People are never going to say there's a greater pitcher than Sandy Koufax. Wayne Gretzky, not you, Frank. He's the consensus greatest hockey player of all time. It's going to be Michael Jordan in basketball. It's going to be very hard to overtake these guys, even if we see a better player, because we decide that this guy is number 1. And Sugar Ray Robinson was way ahead of his time. The thing is, Robinson fought in the 40s, 50s, then, into the mid-60s. But Sugar Ray Robinson was 60, 70 years ahead without the advanced training. He was the advanced training. He was he did phenomenal athletic things in the ring. Phenomenal speed. And yeah, he was better than Willie Pep for one simple reason. He could punch harder.
And that's a big thing.
Big thing. That's what distinguished the two. Pep wasn't a puncher. But if we're going to have that mindset, you can never rate Pernell Whitaker as one of the greatest because Pernell wasn't a puncher.
But Jack, he is rated as one of the greatest.
No,
he's just not the greatest.
And another thing too, Frank, we sometimes, and I'm guilty of this myself, we make the comparison, well, one guy fought so much more times than the other. And I mentioned that earlier in the show about Pep. I could mention Harry Greb 45-0 in 1 year. Compare that to Mayweather's 50-0 for career, and we could say, oh, Greb was absolutely greater. But if Mayweather fought in the 1920s, he would be fighting every 3 weeks or so. And if Greb were fighting during Mayweather's time, he wouldn't have had all those fights, not nearly.
Jack, I agree with that. But here's the other side of that. I think Sugar Ray Robinson is number 1 at welterweight, and I think Sugar Ray Leonard is number 2. Now, why is Leonard up there? Because he has those big wins over Benitez, Duran, Hearns, and Hagler, okay? But if you look at it, the 2 best fighters he fought under middleweight are Hearns and Duran. He didn't go undefeated against them. So what would happen if he had 200 fights and he was facing the best of the best for 200 fights? He'd have more losses too. So I think in that case, that bodes well for Robinson, who was 128-1-2 and 87 knockouts at his prime. I don't know if Robinson's body could have gone through what Leonard's did, and Robinson didn't have the benefactor of the training and nutrition that Leonard did.
I'm not sure was Leonard big into nutrition during the time he fought and all that. I remember reading Leonard said, well, he didn't really stretch, during the time he fought. Now it's kind of overkill. You see these physical trainers, and some of them are very good. Some of them are excellent. I know one. I'm friendly with Scooter Honeck. He's excellent. I've seen him work his fighters out. But some of them are like inventing these new exercises, because it kind of makes them look good in a way.
And fighters lift today. They didn't lift back in Leonard's day.
Well, I also like the attitude of like a Boom Boom Mancini. Not a great fighter, but always came into the ring in great shape. Always dedicated. He did it the old-fashioned way. He hits the punching bags. He jumps rope. He does his road work. He spars.
He does sprint. He did sprints and a lot of road work.
Right, the traditional boxer workouts, he did. It depends. But getting back with Roy Jones, I think we're maybe missing a point. Mayweather, name comes up when we talk about the greatest of all time. We debate it. We put down what Mayweather's saying, because Mayweather's always telling us he's the best. Mayweather's a bigger personality. If him and Roy Jones are in this big banquet hall, more people would flock to Mayweather than Jones. So Mayweather is more of an iconic personality than Roy Jones is. Jones isn't quite an iconic personality. He doesn't draw a crowd. Mayweather could be walking down the street and more people are going to flock and run over to him, and he's going to create a bigger crowd than Jones. But if you ask boxing fans objectively, who have no axe to grind, who was a greater fighter at their peak, Jones and Mayweather? The fighters, boxing fans who are familiar with both, the majority are going to say Jones was better.
I'm glad you said that.
They are. I mean, you're not going to say
right.
How are they going to say no? I think at his peak, Mayweather was better than Jones. I mean,
Jack, Jack, what you just said, I don't talk politics, but this example fits perfect. Joe Biden just got out of the election. He just dropped out of the elections yesterday, okay? He dropped out for one reason, not because of his health, not because of his security. It's because he was behind in the polls and his party didn't think he could win. So the fact is, it's a myth that he got out because of his health, because if he was ahead in the polls, he'd still be in the campaign, right?
Yeah.
Okay. If Mayweather wasn't undefeated, he would never be compared to the fighters he is. If he doesn't get the decision against Castillo and he's 48-1 or 49-1, it's a completely different argument. The same thing with Rocky Marciano. If La Starza gets a decision in the first fight, he's looked at completely different. And if somebody said to you, George Foreman against 48 or 47-1 Rocky Marciano, who wins? Nobody would pick Marciano. So the undefeated with Mayweather is that's his. You talk about where you stamp, what hill you die on. That's his legacy. But Jones, as you said, was clearly the better athlete, the better fighter, more entertaining. He just wasn't as good of a businessman as Mayweather was.
Well, no, and Jones lost a number of fights late on, and we have to take that into account in evaluating someone's career.
Because he fought on Jack and didn't pick his opponent.
But listen, I'm not a believer that fighters should necessarily be given a free pass. Oh, they lost, they were past their peak. What happens, for example, had Ali gotten knocked out by Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle? We would have said, oh, Ali was past his peak. And let's say Ali didn't win another fight after that. We kind of give him a pass. We wouldn't hold it against him, I don't think, But because he beats Foreman, we're touting what he did as so amazing and so great. I don't think you could have it both ways. I just don't.
But wait a second, Jack. Ali in 74 at age 32, clearly he wasn't even the same fighter he was when he lost to Frazier 3 years earlier. So there's no way Foreman, if he would have won that fight, you could say he beat Ali when he was Ali. I mean, fighters have primes, Jack, and they have an apex, and then they fight past that. Ali was not the same fighter in 74 that he was in 71 or 67, I don't think.
But like Angelo Dundee said at the time, no, he's not the same. He's not the same physically, but he can perform as well, get the job done just as well as when he was like younger. And listen, I'm not a believer in these free passes. So if we evaluate career-wise, Mayweather had the better career than Jones. He knew when to get out. He won all his fights.
And he picked his spots.
He picked his spots, but he also beat plenty of good, decent fighters. I mean, you got to give him his due. He didn't beat the monsters, but they are beating the Ricky Hattons.
Name the fighters that Mayweather beat, Jack, as good as James Toney or Bernard Hopkins.
Manny Pacquiao, Canelo Alvarez. I could put them in the same league. I'm not going to say Canelo's better than Bernard Hopkins. I'll just put him in the same category.
I understand what you're saying, but did he beat the best Canelo? No. Did he beat the best best Pacquiao? No. Jones beat the best Toney and nearly the best Hopkins we ever saw.
Well, let me play devil's advocate here. Mayweather was older than Pacquiao when they fought. He still beat a good version of Pacquiao.
3 years after Marquez knocked him out.
No, I was at that Marquez fight. The only reason Marquez knocked him out is because Pacquiao was in another close fight with Marquez, maybe a little bit ahead. He wanted to put space between him and Marquez so badly. He was going all out for knockout, and he was rushing in and got tagged. Really?
So, Jack, that sounds like an excuse. You're not going to give the other guys an excuse. They're older, but you're going to give Pacquiao an excuse for fighting the wrong fight and rushing against an opponent who he wanted to put distance against.
And let me go a step further here, okay? I can't say exactly, what, let me put it this way. Marquez
the suspicion that maybe Marquez had some help?
Marquez had an advantage in that fight. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. He had an advantage.
Is it an advantage that we know for sure Pacquiao never had? Because I'm not sure of that.
I agree with you on that point, but that's whatever. Okay.
Maybe Marquez was just better at it that night.
That's what the rumor was going. But whatever. Listen, I don't rate Pacquiao as high as I do Sugar Ray Leonard. I don't put Pacquiao on my short list of all-time greats. There's second-tier all-time greats. There's the first level where you could have the best of the best, the Robinsons, the Ollie's. Yeah, that could be a group of 20, the Peps. I'd even put Mayweather at the back end of that list. I would, because he defined his era, the Roy Joneses. I would put them there. Then you have guys who are on the fringes, like a Tommy Hearns, a Pacquiao, who you could put on either, the first team or the second team. It's like football, first, second, third team in practice squad. That type of thing.
You think Mayweather beat better fighters than Pacquiao?
I'd have to reevaluate it. I mean, I'd have to go down the list. I can't say off the top of my head. I think Mayweather performed better on balance. He
was more consistent. I'll give him that. But Pacquiao did come up from what was he, 108 pounds at one time?
Yeah. Well, listen, I could use that logic. I could say Roberto Duran was greater than Sugar Ray Leonard because Leonard was always naturally
Jack, and that's plausible. That's plausible. And he beat Leonard in their most legit fight. He beat Leonard. So I don't have a hard time with that. But if you look at the names, if you said to people, who are the best guys that Floyd Mayweather beat? They'd say Ricky Hatton, De La Hoya, Cotto, Alvarez,
Diego Corrales, Nero Hernandez, Juan Manuel Marquez. I mean, he beat some darn good guys. But the thing about Mayweather wasn't a puncher too. When you consider greatness in a guy, we talked about a hypothetical fight between Tommy Hearns and Floyd Mayweather Jr. And I know John Scully posted stuff about this, and Scully said he didn't see a path for Mayweather to win the fight. It's a style.
I agree with him on that. We don't agree on much.
And I kind of disagree. Because I'm not saying Mayweather would win the fight, but I could see the truly all-time great fighters find a way to make an adjustment. Mayweather's never been asked to make that adjustment. If he found himself far behind on points, he would start maybe taking it to Hearns and being,
which would play into Hearns' hands.
Not necessarily, but Mayweather's
absolutely
not a puncher. He's not really a puncher. That would be the problem. I could see him coming on in the late rounds against Hearns and really, taking control of the fight. But maybe Hearns builds up the big lead and survives till the bell and gets the decision. I could see that type of scenario playing out. Don't sell these great fighters short because sometimes because they've never been asked to do anything, it doesn't mean they can't do it. We used to hear, if they got Ali on the ropes, he'd get destroyed. That's all you have to do, get him on the ropes. He can't take a punch.
Only Joe Frazier got him there, and Chuvalo a little bit.
Oh, well, he used the ropes, laid him, but the thought was you get him on the ropes. Even Joe Louis did an article for Ring Magazine when Ali, right before 1967, how I would have clobbered Clay. He said,
I saw it.
I'd get him on the ropes, I'd claw him, I'd do this and that. If Ali fought Lewis, he'd probably be waving him in, leaning back, trying to block shots, and gauging how much Lewis is going to hurt him. If Lewis hurts him with his body shot, he's going to move off,
Or he's going to grab and tie him up.
Yeah, exactly. But
I don't see a path for Mayweather against Hearns. He has a better shot to beat Leonard. I see no path for Mayweather against prime Hearns or the Duran that fought Palomino or Leonard the first time.
Well, when you look at Mayweather, you have to look at Pernell Whitaker in the same light. They're kind of similar, Matt. Kind of similar. They're both great defensively, great defensive fighters, amongst the best ever. These guys don't get hit. And the thing that Mayweather had...
Pernell would never beat Hearns either.
Okay, fair enough. But Mayweather was Whitaker was a lightweight in his prime. So he really was a smaller guy. You have to judge him when he was a lightweight. But the thing about Mayweather, the late rounds have always been his in every fight. You can see
Against the guys he fought, Jack. Yes.
right.
He fought no one in Hearns' league when he fought them, including Canelo.
Yeah, well, Canelo, I give him credit for the Canelo win. He didn't quite beat a prime Canelo. Canelo would become better later on. I don't have an argument there, but we both know Mayweather would have beaten any version of Canelo, style-wise.
If Canelo has to weigh 152 pounds, Mayweather's always going to win that fight. I agree with that. And stylistically, he has the type of style that gives Canelo trouble, which is another reason why Canelo has a lot of trepidation about fighting Terrence Crawford, because I think he sees kind of the same thing. And Jack, if Canelo lost to Crawford in the next year and a half, he could never live that down. If it wasn't a controversial decision and it was a legit loss like he lost to Mayweather, he could never live that down. And I think it's going to take a lot of money for that to happen. Jack, there's something else you wanted to talk about. So let's come a little bit more.
That was annoying. You put a post up, Frank. I enjoy your posts. They're very good. They're very thought-provoking. But you put up a post, which I understood where you're coming from. It turned me off a little about you mentioning there are no good boxing writers out there. Okay, if you want to name the current boxing writers you don't like, and we're not going to do that on that show.
I didn't say they weren't.
Personally, don't dig up the Norman Mailers and guys like that.
But guys, they emulate those guys. They try to emulate him, Jack. Do you know how many articles I can't get through them, but I read half of them and I hear about, he was thinking this and he was fighting for his family and his mother and his country, and going into round 6 when it looked like he was really down, he had visions of his family and there would be no food on the table if he didn't win. I hate that style, and Norman Mailer started that. And the other problem I have, Jack, and I'm not including you because in all honesty, I haven't seen that much of your work because I don't have access to it. And I don't think you do this. I don't think you belabor.
Google my work and read a couple of articles.
These guys belabor a point over and over and over, and then they'll say something that's so rudimentary that everybody knows, and they act like they found gold and nobody else figures that out. But my problem is, Jack, I have to admit, they just they don't keep my interest that much. Now, maybe it's just me, because when I go back and I read some of my own articles, I find myself a little bit bored. So maybe it's me and I have ADD really bad, but I just don't like that window dressing like some of these guys do. It's like the pretty words and all that. Tell me about why this guy's good, why I need to watch this fight, what he does that makes him special, what the other guy can do to offset it. I already know their records. I know what title it's for, and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I don't like the very long articles that they last forever. I like things that are thought-provoking, and but there are a lot of good writers around. There are a lot of good writers, and I didn't like the reference back to the days of Norman Mailer. No one is trying to copy Norman Mailer.
I disagree. I see that a lot.
The majority of writers never heard of Norman Mailer. Let me tell you a little story with Norman Mailer, okay? When Jose Torres got inducted into the Hall of Fame in Canastota, for 1 year, I was in charge of the journal, getting the stories, putting it together for only 1 year. And I contact Jose Torres, and I had an idea. Wow, wouldn't that be great if Norman Mailer wrote the story for the journal? And I asked Jose, can you ask him? He does. Norman Mailer gets the story over to me about Jose. Jose was telling me on the phone, talking about it, and I thought I heard him crying. He was so touched by the story. I read the story, Frank. It was so flat. I couldn't keep my mind on it. Had it been a novice writer, someone I didn't know, I would have thought, I'm not going to use this guy anymore. This guy just doesn't have it.
That's a good story.
But it was the great Norman Mailer, so I didn't edit anything. I didn't touch it. It's Norman Mailer. Who the heck am I to touch his stuff and start telling him correct this? unless I found an absolutely glaring mistake factually, I was going to leave his work alone, which I did, because it's Norman Mailer, but it was flat.
When you were younger, say during the 60s, when your love for boxing was just then starting to formulate, who did you like?
My favorite writer were from the New York Post. Newspapers had a big bearing. I loved Lester Bromberg. He was the writer for the New York Post.
Right, I know the name.
It doesn't mean he was a great writer, but I enjoyed reading him. I enjoyed reading Milton Gross, what he wrote. Larry Merchant wrote for the New York Post. He wrote in Philadelphia.
I liked him.
I wasn't a big reader of the New York Times for Dave Anderson, but I really liked Lester Bromberg, and I enjoyed Ring Magazine, some of the guys, Dan Daniel, I enjoyed. He was pretty factual. But Lester Bromberg, he was my childhood favorite, you could say.
Did you like Dick Young?
Dick Young, I enjoyed Dick Young, but he wasn't a boxing guy. Dick Young was very basic. I knew when I read Dick Young, I know more boxing than Dick Young, but I enjoyed hearing his opinions anyway. Dick Young carried tremendous clout. Let me tell you a story of the type of clout.
He did, Al. He always used to quote him.
There was this welterweight Johnny Turner. His biggest fight was against Wilfred Benitez on the CBS Sports Spectacular. It was Benitez's first fight back after losing the title to Sugar Ray Leonard. He stopped Turner on cuts in 9 rounds. Turner, New York welterweight, had a career record, 42 wins, 6 losses, 2 draws, 34 stoppages. Good record. He was in the movie Raging Bully, played the part of Laurent Thal. When Turner's career was over, he took the test to become a sanitation worker, and they told him he failed the physical. Turner mentioned it to one of the doctors, I think it was Edwin Campbell of the New York State Athletic Commission. Is there anything he could do to help him? There happened to be a fight show that night. Campbell mentioned it to Dick Young. Dick Young liked Johnny Turner, and he wrote about it in his column about all the red tape in the sanitation department. How could they not give Turner a license? The next day, Turner gets a call from the sanitation department, come down.
And they hired him?
He got the job, and he had a career in the sanitation department. If it wasn't for Dick Young writing about it, everyone came to attention in the sanitation department. Whoa, Dick Young basically said, how can this guy have a whole career and be in all these tough fights, but you're telling him his back is too bad, where he could pass the physicals here, but not work for the sanitation? So that's kind of cool. That showed you the clout that Dick Young had.
Jack, I do think my biggest problem is, look, it's no secret. Everybody that follows this sport that's in the media, Jack, what's the site you go to most often?
I go to 2 sites. I want information. I go to Fight News and Boxing Scene.
Okay.
And sometimes I'm on ESPN for other sports. I'll take a look at the boxing, but ESPN's boxing coverage, it's poor. It's really poor.
But is it safe to say that not a day goes by that at least you don't check Fight News and Boxing Scene at least one time?
I check it at least once a day. Yeah.
Okay. And that applies to myself. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Fight News is more news, and it's not really articles. It's just facts and info, dates, records, who's fighting who. But I find a lot of articles on Boxing Scene and the Sweet Science, they're so long and they're so repetitive. And I'm thinking to myself, sir, you just said this in paragraph 3. Here I am in paragraph 7, and you're repeating the same thing. You made the point, and I think my issue with that is, Jack, that some writers think the more words they have, the more it means or it signifies that they know a lot about boxing. And I can see through that. So maybe I overstated what I said, but that's the point I was making, that they just belabor and it goes on and on and on. And I really do think some guys try to hit the word count and they think that means they know a lot about boxing, where it's not about the words. It's what you say in the words. And I've had guys who have contacted me that say they want to write, and is there any advice I could give them? And I say, well, I don't know if I'm the guy that you want to ask, but I will just say this: don't overwrite. And I think that's the case with a lot of writers today, just like the commentators. We grew up in the Don Dunphy era. He talked when there was something to say. He assumed that the audience had a clue, and the viewers, of what they were watching. And I think it's the same thing with today's writers.
You mentioned Dick Young before, and I remember once he talked about writers, and he said a writer should write like he's talking to the people.
That's what I always tried to do.
Writer. Yeah, listen, everyone has their own style. I mean, some people like certain writers better than the others, and it depends on the topic you're on, too, whether you're doing a fight report, a feature story. But I know, too, I could tell even in my own work, if I get bored reading my article, someone else is going to get bored. But if I read my article and I love it, and then I look at it a second and third time and say, I really like this,
right,
someone else is going to like it. That's the way, I'm normally going to look at it. But who is your favorite writer?
Jack, I can't say for sure who my favorite was, but I have to admit, the guy I liked reading the most about boxing, and remember, when I grew up in Haddonfield, New Jersey, we got the Philadelphia papers. So I was too young at that time to really think about the New York papers and the writers they had there. So I would read the Philly papers, and I have to admit, the guy I enjoyed the most about writing about boxing was Jack McKinney. Jack McKinney was the guy that, like, when I saw he wrote something and there was an article in there, I had to buy that paper and I would read it over and over and over.
Oh, Joe, by the way, Joe Bergman put Bernard Fernandez. Fernandez is top of the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Fernandez is top of the line. Good.
Now, Bernard he's one of those guys that could do everything. He's good with the news. He's good with the backgrounds. He's good at breaking the fight down. I enjoyed Bernard.
He taught me something that was very valuable once, and I took it as a lesson. We're at Canastota for Hall of Fame weekend. They just made the movie The Hurricane. Hurricane Carter was there, but he wasn't giving interviews. I used the connection to speak to Carter. Would he talk to me and allow me to interview him? And I was stunned when he told the person, yeah, he'll do an interview with me. It was like off the rails. Me doesn't even know me. And all of a sudden I find myself hanging out with Carter. He's going somewhere. He waves for me to go with him. We sit down alone finally. And the only thing he will talk to me about is the Hall of Fame weekend. He won't talk to me about himself. And I'm starting to become a little bit argumentative. I don't care that much what you think Hall of Fame weekend. I want to talk to you about the movie, the past, the this, the that, some of the fighters. He's starting to get very angry with me. And I tell myself, I better get out of here. Otherwise, I'm going to be on the national news. Hurricane knocking out my teeth and, just got out, the movie and all. Bernard Fernandez told me later, you should have gone along with him. Do what he says, and then you could gently ease into getting what you want as a reporter. And it always stuck with me, wow, but Bernard taught me a lesson how I should handle it.
Jack, Bernard Fernandez, when I was writing for the Sweet Science, around the years that Hopkins was fighting Jermaine Taylor, I was trying to get in touch with Hopkins to write about him, and he wouldn't talk to me because he didn't know me. Bernard Fernandez made one call. He gets back to me, goes, here's Bernard's number. Call him at this time. I vouch for you. He'll talk to you. Jack, Hopkins and I talked on the phone for 3 hours and 11 minutes.
You're probably Frank. He talked 3 hours and you talked 11 minutes. But
Jack, in all honesty, it's not like this show, and I talked as much as he did.
Okay. Okay, till next week. Great discussion, Frank. And
we'll have a lot to talk about next week.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot of fun. Take care.
Thanks for watching, everybody.